It seems to be a ritual at this point. Every year when winter drags on, I try out a new art supply, something colorful and pretty. Join me for my art haul, diving into Korean traditional paints and then a mixed media painting inspired by the unicorn in captivity. Each month I send out postcards and art prints and even stickers to my Patreon members, and the illustration in this video is our February art print. Let's start with an art haul. This comes from Hwabang.net, a Korean art shop. I usually stock up on essentials with them, but this haul is different. These kinds of art hauls are so exciting, like shiny new toys, but I always want to make sure that I actually use all these materials. So this is a very different art haul to what I would usually get, as pretty much nothing here is connected to the materials and art style I usually work in. So many of my art hauls I justify by, oh, I need this for work, I need these brushes, I need these surfaces, and then I add little fun trinkets on the side to experiment with. But this is just pure indulgence, as I've been eyeing these sets since they came out. But let's look at those in just a moment. First, I wanted to talk about some of the brushes I got. As you can probably see here, this is all about Korean traditional paints, Korean colors, so I brought out the appropriate brushes for that. I actually own some traditional paint brushes already. Most of these are in quite terrible condition because I got them second hand at like a flea market yard sale kind of event. And so for the first time I bought a traditional Minhwa paintbrush. These are incredibly densely packed. Even once you add water, there's barely any like flaring of brush bristles, and you do push the paint around in very small areas. It's a different approach from watercolors, and I'm very excited to give it a try today. Not the fanciest, not the cheapest, kind of just something to try out. On top of the nearly 50% off paint sets, there was also a brush event, so because I ordered during that period, I got these paint brushes for free. And you know maybe that I don't really use big brushes in my art because I paint so small, so I thought these are a nice addition to experiment with without overcommitting because, well, they were just a free sample. These are both from the same brand but different bristles, and then a small one. I have used these exact ones before. They are great for gouache, watercolor, just kind of a mixed media brush. And speaking of mixed media, I did actually buy one thing that I need for my usual art practice. Really need to stock up on white gouache paint, so I got the Holbein Artist's Gouache in primary white. The previous one I had was the permanent white. There's still some left, so this is actually a great opportunity to compare the two, as I have no idea what the difference is. I actually got multiple comments over kind of the last half year or so, ever since I got into gouache painting with the Holbein in particular, that the Holbein gouache are very expensive, and especially the Irodori paint sets that I personally use. I completely sympathize with that, but also please remember that I live in South Korea, with Holbein, a Japanese brand, being our pretty much next door neighbor here. That's probably why they're, in comparison, much cheaper here than they would be if you have to import them kind of around the globe. So for me, these are actually quite a budget-friendly option. Still not cheap, but also I get them at a probably better rate than most of you. If you have access to other artist-grade gouache, then please give those a try. Personally, I've only ever tried Winsor & Newton, Caran d'Ache, and these. Oh, and the Minhwa ones, also kind of just at a friend's place. If you're concerned about the pricing of these, I'm sure there are, like for each country, each place of residence, there are way more affordable options. It's just what I kind of reach for and what is easy accessible for me. I guess this also could count as just a general work-friendly palette. Personally, I love porcelain palettes of all kinds, and this has some deeper indents, so I can mix hopefully larger quantities, which will also be important for the Minhwa paints here. But I can use this for gouache, for watercolor, whatever else. If you've been to my channel before, then you know that I like my limited palettes. I often get small sets. I like the Zorn palette. Usually, even for my acrylic paintings, I keep the paints to under a dozen. But I really just couldn't decide between these two sets. One more traditional, but one with really fun, more pastel-y paints. And so to complement that huge amount, I didn't actually have any kind of palette that would fit more than 12 paints at a time. And so I got this just simple metal palette with, how many is that? 52? Yeah, 52 little paint things. The metal has this nice matte finish and it feels very sturdy. So this is where I'll put all of these paints, and this is the palette I'll be using for the actual mixing and painting. These two sets are by a brand called Alpha. I actually have used some of their products in the past, mostly some cheaper acrylic paints and gel mediums. Those worked perfectly fine. I have their gesso as well. It's a Korean brand, it's been around for quite a while, and they've come out with this updated version of their Korean Minhwa paint line. And I've been eyeing these for the longest while and could never quite justify getting a full set. Now here we are. Recently I've been painting a lot of temples, Korean Buddhist temples, and I'm looking into some Jeju and Korean mythology for future illustrations, and I just thought that some Minhwa elements, even if I don't pay the entire piece in these, would be really interesting. There are also classes around Jeju, and I'd love to attend one of those. I have to say the packaging is gorgeous. And they come with a swatch sheet, I didn't even know that. It's a really nice paper. It's not hanji, so not the Korean traditional paper. And we've got the swatch sheet ready to go. I'm not sure how easy to find these would be internationally. I know that Hwabang.net has some kind of international shipping system. Depending on where you live, you should be able to get these, but there are other brands like Shinhan that do a similar kind of paint line that should be easier to find. I personally really like kind of minimalist, but also beautiful, thought through design, and this just feels very appropriate. These are the actual paint tubes. They come in this matte plastic tube. Of course, I immediately gravitate to all the green tones, so the reason I got this set is that it has all the basics like black, white, it even comes with 2 tubes of white, so that's why these are 26 colors per set. Some earth tones, quite a variety of traditional reds. This one I'm really curious about, Modan. All of these come with the usual information that you'd find on paint tubes. There's the transparency information, light fastness rating, the pigment information. Oh, I'm actually really curious to check what kind of pigments we have. I'll have to bring out my list. PW18 isn't titanium white. Yes, this will be interesting because even just the white paint here, the pigment number 18, W18, isn't even on my list. It's not zinc white, not lead white, not titanium. So these will have a whole different range of pigments that I'm not familiar with. I'm curious to see if I can even fit them on my list, if I should start a whole new spread to compare. Let me just double check, even just the yellow. Pale yellow 35, that's actually a cadmium. Okay. And 83, do we have that here? Yes, that's a diarylite yellow, which I really like, and the 110 might be on here as well. No, I only have 111. So kind of a mix of stuff that I'm familiar with and all new pigments, so that will be interesting during the swatching process. Now, why do I have 2 sets, you might ask? Especially as a fan of limited palettes. What's this about? This set is the A set. It comes with gold paint, black paint, the 2 white paints, and then kind of the basic traditional colors from different green tones to earth tones, blues, a couple purples, a single yellow, though some of the browns might also kind of fit into that category. Yeah, you could just work with these, right? Quite easily. It's a lot of paint, but just you wait. Because the reason I couldn't resist the second set, which also comes with a swatch sheet, is all about pastel tones. Like these peachy, pink, lilac tones that I just kind of immediately fell in love with when I saw the online lineup. Everything is just a hint paler. I think this will be gorgeous for some floral, spring-themed illustrations. And I know myself, even if you give me a dark gouache palette, for example, like the winter set by Holbein, I mix everything with white to kind of hone everything just a little bit into that pastel area. So I'm just really curious how these compare. And most importantly, there are gray tones in here, as in from silver to actual gray tones. This one here is a proper silver paint. So very excited to give these a go, to see what kind of pigments we have in use here versus the more saturated, deeper colors. And at the same time, while this is a kind of pastel themed set, it still has darker tones as well, so I'm kind of curious if it works on its own. Now, what do I know about Minhwa? Very little. I've watched tutorials, I went to one class about 4 years ago, and we'll see how much of that I remember. I'll be doing my color swatches on the provided paper here, but I also have Hanchi paper prepared, and I think I'll do my monthly Patreon illustration in these paints, but on watercolor paper, to see how that kind of mixed media approach goes. I've seen a lot of Korean artists use these on watercolor papers, so not super purist about it, but I do want to learn more about Korean traditional painting, of course. I also raided my local library when it comes to any kind of books about traditional painting. I didn't expect these to get here so quickly, so I haven't yet borrowed the Minhwa workbook that I'd reserved, but I think it might be fun to look at some traditional motifs, how animals and plants and nature scenes are rendered, then do some experiments, and in the end paint something in a bit of a mixed media stylistic approach as well. But I'm glad there's a lot of cats and dragons in here, because that will at some point come in handy. I'm so excited because really ever since Alpha announced this new line of paints, I've been kind of keeping my eye on them, and suddenly they were 47% off, which really just meant I got these two for the price of one. So not my smartest financial choice maybe, but I'm really excited, and I think there's some fun art scenes or mini illustrations on the horizon if I end up liking how these feel. I also brought out this Korean traditional paint by the brand Shinhan. I know that these are easier to find internationally, so I just want at some point during my swatching process to compare this with maybe a similar color By the way, the 2 paper wraps that came around the boxes also have the color swatches, so maybe here you can see kind of the overall difference in vibe that these sets have. I think the biggest difference also when I looked at these online was the focus on bright red tones versus here kind of replacing those with these pinks, lilacs. There's more teal, softer blues, and of course the silver and grey tones. So I'll keep these around. I might cut these out and glue them into a notebook. I hope you stick around even if you're not super interested maybe in Minhwa itself, because I will be painting in mixed media later on watercolor paper, maybe including some gouache even, I don't know yet. And let's just enjoy some new art supplies. Maybe you have something you got over the holidays that you haven't used yet and want to sit down with your own sketchbook, your swatch sheet, and join me as I do some exploration. It was so relaxing to have such a large palette to fill. These paints are often labeled as Korean watercolors, but the binder is very different, using gelatin glue or Agave instead of gum arabic. I also wanted to mention that I used the term Minhwa during this entire video for the painting style I'm finding inspiration in, so Korean traditional folk art. But there are other categories, umbrella terms like 한국화 or 동양화, so Korean art and Eastern art, and then different styles like Buddhist paintings or court painting as well. The box itself calls these paints 한국화 채색, Korean color paints. 채색화, color paintings, contrasts with 수묵화, ink paintings. If you watched my travel sketching art vlog from last week, where I visited the Sumuk exhibition in Mokpo, you can see both traditional and contemporary examples of that. And the art pieces at those exhibits were stuck in my head for months and probably are part of the reason why I really wanted to dive into both traditional ink and color painting. Pastel shades really look so pretty, straight out of the tube. So I'm really excited for both of these palettes. In my color swatches, you can see how these paints apply quite smoothly. Only a few colors have granulation. I hopped back and forth between different brushes to use this moment to get a feel for the paints. The opaque paints are less opaque than gouache, placing these between watercolors and gouache for me. The opaque paints also feel like they use incredibly fine pigments, not giving any chalky or grainy feel. And overall, my first impression of the color selection was incredibly positive. I immediately fell in love with all the brown and green tones in the A set. I think this one will be great for nature scenes, and I'm excited to go sketching once spring is finally here. The B set isn't just a toned down version of the A set. I'm very happy about that. I was a tad worried. There are of course these pastel tones in it, but there's still intense oranges, dark browns and deep blues. So I think this palette will work on its own as well. I went to the library to grab a book on traditional paintings. They also have workbooks, but I'm only on the wait list for the ones that I wanted, so this book here focuses on historical paintings and isn't a painting tutorial or even introduction how to use these materials. I'm actually really happy that I started with this historical inspiration. There's a lot of amazing contemporary and more experimental Minhwa out there, but going back to the roots to find inspiration and become familiar with the shape language of flowers and leaves felt very fitting. Chesekwa and Sumukwa have long histories, and I know I won't be learning all about it in the span of filming a single video. So I'm embracing a mixed media approach. While I tried these out on hanji, traditional paper, I also used my regular sketchbooks and watercolor paper to have a sense of familiarity. We don't have to learn everything at once. The ink I'm using is from an inkstone. I've been using this one for years and you can barely tell. The last time it showed up in a video here was probably during my Dracula art scene making of, where I used ink for some cute little vignette drawings. It's always interesting to try out different ratios of water to ink, how long to grind the stone, and I experimented with different ratios here. Once these ink drawings dry, they will be waterproof, so I'll also be using ink for my actual illustration. I mentioned that Shinhan also has a traditional paint range, and this one might be easier to find internationally. Funnily enough, a lot of Shinhan products are more tricky to find for me. My local art shop, for example, doesn't carry their gouache paints. It's funny how that works with brands and international and local availability. The opal green, which I applied straight out of the tube instead of re-wetting it on a palette, created a beautiful smooth paint swatch, and the color is incredibly vibrant. I've seen both of these brands used by Korean artists, so I'm curious to learn more about all the different paints and how they compare as I get more familiar with Chisekwa. Compared to those first pencil and ink sketches I drew a couple days before, this second round of ink drawings flowed much better. It really feels like getting used to writing in a new language, in a new alphabet, familiarizing myself with shapes and how they represent specific elements of nature. And I think this step is important so that I can write in this new language before I try to form sentences and tell stories. I also really like working in this very diluted ink mixture here. I didn't grind my inkstone all that much, and I feel like the lines look very delicate like this, so I'll probably keep this consistency going for my actual illustration. So what's the story I want to tell for my first Minhwa-inspired painting? I've mentioned that tapestry, The Unicorn in Captivity, before. It's a favorite of mine. And as it was just before Solal, the Lunar New Year, I wanted to turn it into a Year of the Horse illustration for my experiment here. I painted 2 small color studies first, trying to get an idea of how I want to represent fire in my illustration using both of these palettes together, so none of these are just palette A or palette B. I very much like the bold red unicorn surrounded by dark greens. For the unicorn itself, I also tried out a few different approaches, looking at some of the animal illustrations in that book on Minhwa. You can see some of the very goofy eyes that I drew here, which were actually part of different dragon paintings in the book. But without the body behind them, they really look quite silly. I want to keep my unicorn very stylized to make sure that the red color is the standout point and the drawing itself not too intricate. I'll be painting on Hanemühle Agave paper, which has a fibery texture that reminds me of some kinds of hanji that I've used in the past, just much heavier. So this will be mixed media, but not only in materials, using watercolor brushes together with traditional ones, watercolor paper instead of hanji, but also, of course, the style itself. This is why filming in winter is kind of tricky, because my best filming spot with natural light has this much sunlight. I usually try to film with natural light, especially if I use specific new colors that I want to showcase. I guess for today I'll stop here. I've done quite a few experiments in ink, in my new alpha colors, went through some of these traditional paintings, and because I want to finish this illustration as the February art print, I don't want to wait for ideal lighting to start drawing more of that, so I've cleaned up my actual work desk where the lighting is less ideal but more consistent. So let's take all these sketches and notes and the agave paper to head over and start drawing. I've been mostly working on client illustrations here, so it was a bit of a pain to move all my acrylic painting supplies and work in progress pieces out of the way. Let's see how far I can get tonight. The reason I'm working on the agave paper is really quite simple. I don't have hanji at that particular size. I do have these panels, but they have a really strong texture and I'm not confident I'd be able to pull off the amount of detailing I want to achieve on this. I've only painted on these once or twice at very small sizes and more for calligraphy kind of result. The agave paper has a quite fibery surface, so that's actually a bit similar to hanji. It's just so much heavier, so it will probably absorb the paint quite a bit. I'm really just getting familiar with these paints. I'm not here to learn the entire traditional art of Minhwa in a weekend, right? That's why I'm even attempting this kind of fusion style. It's so that I can learn about these paints, how they feel, how they combine with ink lines. But there are still some familiar elements that aren't typical to Minhwa that I'll just bring in for a bit of a mixed media, mixed style approach. I definitely want to learn more about it in the future, maybe take some classes here on Jeju. And I also just think it's a more authentic version of myself, right? Because I have these, yes, Korean traditional paints and influences that inspire me because I live here, but there's also kind of my own illustration background, and I want to combine those into one, and there's a bit of a fantasy element to it as well, fantasy mythology. So I'm really bringing it all into one illustration. I hope. I'll keep all of my notes kind of to the side. And that's actually something I would recommend you do as well. If you learn about a new art form, don't only look at the references themselves of like an art book or even on the internet, right? But use your own sketches that you drew based on those as reference and kind of go from there. I feel like I often understand how a plant illustration, for example, here works better if I try to sketch it so that future Evie can draw it based on that sketch, if that makes sense. I'll be drawing a lot of yongot, the lotus flowers, and there will be a peach tree, and then the unicorn in bright red. You can see my tiny color test here in the top right corner. I'll probably just cut off this side of the paper once the drawing is finished, or I might paint over this. I just didn't want to start drawing my detailed line art before seeing if the paints actually work. Real Minhwa paintings aren't miniatures. I'm going very small here for all my botanical elements because I want them to emulate the busy tapestry texture. For proper Minhwa or Chesekwa, I'd have to go much larger. A lot of the samples in that book that I use for inspiration are actually wall screens, several meters wide. But I think this will be fun and make for a really beautiful print, and it's an homage to a favorite artwork while also learning something new. But I just want to be very clear that I'm not painting traditional Minhwa here, just use the design language for this fusion approach. The drawing takes influences from those historical paintings. I love lotus flowers especially, and so turned the lower half of the meadow into a lotus pond. All my sketches are arranged and scattered somewhere around my desk. I want to look at them for reference first, so that I don't just copy the historical art. The lotus flowers then transition into morando, paintings of peony flowers, probably one of the most typical and immediately recognizable flower shapes in traditional paintings. The Hanemühle Agave paper feels great for line drawings with its very unusual texture and works well for the ink as well. I much prefer it to typical cold press watercolor paper where we get heavier pattern indents. It's perfect for this very finicky, detailed drawing. As a tree, I chose a peach tree, often featured in paintings showing the 10 symbols of longevity, together with bamboo and pine trees. Peaches are also a symbol for abundance and spring, and so it felt appropriate for the coming season and as a wish for the new year. I kind of forgot how long line art illustrations take. I'm so used to painting in gouache and acrylics in a quite brushy, rough approach without a visible line drawing. The pencil drawing and then lining everything with ink really took a while, and you can probably tell that I filmed this entire video, from the unboxing to swatches to sketching and drawing and painting, over more than a week. And I think that's important to mention. Art videos can make it look like every art process is a harmonious, continuous entity. Reality, even for full-time illustrators, rarely looks like that, as uninterrupted painting time is quite rare. I filmed the art haul unboxing one morning, the filling of the new palette on another one, and then the swatching on a late afternoon. The drawings and sketching over several evenings, and now I've only just started painting. We have these little pockets of time here and there, and I'd rather have these small portions of art than waiting for a perfect, uninterrupted day full of inspiration. It also gave me time to reflect. As the days passed, I had more ideas for my unicorn illustration, like bringing in the tarot card symbolism or choosing certain plants that I wouldn't have considered if I just went from art haul directly to the final painting. So if you ever feel overwhelmed or like there's never enough time for a proper painting session, I relate, and it's completely fine to take it slow, one step at a time, maybe 5 minutes here or 10 minutes there. These paints are feeling like a more transparent, fine-grained and delicate gouache at times, but still very distinct. It gives a lot of control when blending and layering. The gelatin glue, Agave, binder, making the paints feel just a bit sticky when blending, so I took it slow. If you're similar to me, enjoying a slow art approach, then this might be a great medium to try out, giving you a lot of control while still keeping that flow of watercolors. They go really well with line drawings, as they are not opaque enough to make the lines completely disappear, so you can partially paint over your line art without obscuring it, but with enough opacity to create build-up. You can see that I used certain paints quite quickly, and I ended up refilling the white and the pale lavender shade multiple times, so I'm glad that the set came with multiple white paints. I often used one brush with paint on it to layer in my colors, and then a clean water-only brush for the actual blending. I've seen this done by Korean traditional artists, and I'm definitely not great at it and struggle holding multiple brushes at once, especially larger ones, but it turned out quite efficient. and the paints are really easy to push and pull across the page. In contrast to watercolors, these paints aren't usually applied with wet on wet techniques. It's really that opposite approach of wet on dry, but then going in with a water-only brush for blending. I found that process incredibly relaxing, and it gave me a lot of control, which you might know that I enjoy that when it comes to painting. It's why I like acrylics so much, after all. I'm glad I got both sets. There is a lot of variety here, and I didn't find the colors to be repetitive. Also, looking at the pigments, there's variety too between the sets, like more cobalt blue in the B set instead of phthalo or ultramarine in the A set. That pastel lavender shade that I'd mentioned, especially, mixed beautifully with all the greens and blues of the A palette for dark yet soft shades. I love all the green and blue tones, by the way, but also the variety of browns and reds, which were perfect for my fire horse, and also the softer hues of the plants. I'm so used to limited color palettes, so it was interesting to have such a wide range of colors available and find harmonious mixes and contrast within them. I think they nailed the color selection for these two sets and really enjoyed using both of them together. This illustration took multiple days of just painting here and there, working on one project or another. To finish, I went to a couple art markets even over the Solal holiday and then finished just in time. really love the pastel shades from the B set when layered over the more saturated colors that are included in both sets. So starting with transparent, intense shades and then building up with these softer, milky pastels. You can hopefully see how they build up in vibrancy on these peaches especially. And I kept looking at that historical art book for reference on colors as well. There's probably more efficient ways to go about this. I'm still new to these paints, so I kind of just tried out different methods of applications, using them more like watercolors, more like gouache, and then trying all these techniques I'd seen Korean artists use. And then, in the end, going back to what I was comfortable with. I'm really happy with how the illustration itself turned out. A mix of styles, but I hope a love letter to all of them and a celebration of the new year. I wanted my unicorn, my fire horse, to look like it had just rested enough and was about to get up and break free. In the original tapestry, the unicorn is, of course, in captivity, the fence surrounding it closed, but here I had it shattered into just wooden pieces, bringing in some of the tarot symbolism that I'd mentioned with the 9 of Wands. So this illustration really is a mixture of all kind of symbolism, anything that I enjoy and find inspiring, and that would maybe heighten the message. At the end, I wanted to intensify that red fiery glow of my unicorn, and these paints layer really beautifully. You can kind of just keep on layering and blending until you get the intense result you're looking for, while still keeping it soft overall. This is the Patreon print for February at 2 sizes as usual, and I'm excited to send out the letters next week. You can sign up until March 3rd because it's a long weekend here, and I wish you a happy Lunar New Year again. Let me know what kind of art materials you've been experimenting with, if you've been learning or wanting to study anything new, be it a new art style, something about art history, or just a simple new technique from a tutorial. I really enjoyed the entire process so much. I feel like I learned a lot and still have so much more left to learn. I'm excited to take some classes in the future and dive deeper into Minhwa and Chesekwa. Thank you so much for watching. Happy Lunar New Year once again, and I hope to see you again in my next art video.